Afternoon, colleagues. It's exactly 2 minutes past 2, and I think we can start. Welcome to today's webinar on disaster-induced imports dynamics evidence from South African floods. And today we are so pleased to welcome our speaker, Dr. Marina Dodlova, who is an assistant professor at the University of Munster. And I'm not going to dwell much on her CV. I'm just going to flight it so we can just have a few minutes to actually have a look at it. Tell me if you can see it.
We can.
Okay. Her research actually focuses more on political economy and climate shocks and economic behaviors. So without wasting any time, I'm going to hand over to you, Dr. Dodlova. You can take us through the presentations and the findings.
Thank you very much. As it's a great pleasure for me. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to present our piece of research on the impact of floods on trade in South Africa, and it's a joint work with Justyna Jantos and Anna Kochanova, who might be in the floor as well, and Krisztina was unable to attend, but basically it's a joint work, yes, with other female researchers, and we now know a lot about disasters, how disasters destroy economic activity, but much less is known about how firms adapt. So we actually contribute to this strand of the literature. Climate shocks are no longer rare shocks at the margin, right? So they're becoming a recurring economic policy challenge. Floods are particularly relevant because they directly disrupt production, logistics, infrastructure, as well as supply chains. And in countries where public adaptation capacity is limited, firms themselves may become important adaptation actors, right? So one possible adaptation channel is international trade. If domestic suppliers fail, firms may try to seek alternative suppliers in the international market. So this is basically our main idea, which drives our research. And yeah, so let's start. Wait, sorry, something happens. Could you see my slides? Yeah. So firms actually affect firms in more than one way. So they destroy buildings, productive capital, affect workers. At the same time, they might destroy output and delay production process.
Sorry, Marina, we can't see your slide. If you don't mind, you can just project it, or I can project it from my side.
But I think something happened. Oh. Sorry.
Okay.
Now we can see them.
There we go. And if you can just put it on a slide mode, please. There we go.
So,
yes.
Sorry. No, before it. I think it's maybe because of my sphere. Okay. So then, yeah. So our main question: can global market access help firms adapt to climate shocks such as floods? And and floods. As I said, floods can affect firms in more than one way. First, they destroy buildings, productive capital, affect workers. They might destroy also output and delay production process. What's important for us, they destroy infrastructure and thus affect input-output networks. So this means that basically supply chains might be disrupted, and these were like all negative effects, but on the same time, floods generate demand for reconstruction. As such, recovery might also lead to some positive effects. So we basically focus on the imports, right? So because this is imports are the clearest observable adaptation margin, right? And we ask whether floods lead to reduction or increase of imports. And on the negative channel, as mentioned, we see damaged firms, infrastructure disruption, low production, less capacity to import, right? So imports are expected to decrease. On the adaptive channel, we expect that if domestic suppliers are disrupted, firms might try to search for alternatives, right? So they might enter the international market and they substitute imports from domestic suppliers with the inputs from the international market. So the net effect might be ambiguous here. We already know from the literature that at the cross-country level, right, so indeed floods impact trade capabilities, and actually foreign aid might boost exports and imports. Also, disasters lead to lasting supply chain reconfiguration, and firms in countries might be affected through global value chains. But this is at the country level, right? The evidence at the firm level is much more limited, and this is basically represent these papers which represent the results not only from floods but also from different disasters. The only paper which is on floods is by Claire Balboni, and they look at the floods in Pakistan, and they also show that firms relocate and diversify supplier networks away from the affected regions. But in the other papers show that indeed the supply chain change because of the disasters, and this is evidence from the United States, from India, from Japan, and also from such disasters as earthquakes and storms. The only challenge here is that actually not a lot of papers show these effects within country evaluation, right? So our open questions here then, if we look at regional import flows, how they respond in the mid and long run, when on the one hand local firms are directly exposed to floods, and on the other hand domestic suppliers of these firms are affected by the floods, right, within country. So if yes, what type of firms are driving these changes in regional imports patterns? And our study is contributive in several ways. So first, we conduct the study based on the rich administrative customs data and from tax records. And we link this data with spatial temporal variation and flood exposure. Then we disentangle direct flood exposure and impacts through the value chain, right? So we impute supply effectiveness measure. And we also look at the mid-term effects because our effect is considered as cumulative, right? So basically, as soon as flood happens, the effect might prolong for several months or like forever. So we basically look at different measures of floods in a cumulative way. And South Africa represents very useful setting for such study because it's highly integrated into international markets, right? And it has significant dependence at the same time on imported inputs. So as well, it has strong regional trade connections, and floods are the South Africa's most common natural hazard. So over 30% of all disasters since the 1980s are basically floods. So this is exactly the kind of economy where trade-based adaptation could matter. And if we look at the partner countries of South Africa, so we could see the largest partners are basically European Union, China and the rest of the world, I think Brazil, India. But what's also what's important for us, as you could see later, that actually African networks and Chinese networks are those who are more important in firms' resilience behavior. So our conceptual framework is the following, right? So we try to really look separately at the impacts of direct exposure to floods, right, and indirect exposure. So local floods act as a negative productive shock according to our intuition, right? So they should reduce firms' ability to import, and so import activity in such affected regions is expected to decline. Indirect supply chain effects mean that basically when floods disrupt domestic supply chains, firms might replace local suppliers with foreign ones, right? And imports are expected to increase in such a case. Thanks to the South Africa tiered program and Univider, so we basically also National Treasury, South African Revenue Service, we could access the administrative data on customs transactions, right? And we also could merge this data with corporate income tax records and pay-as-you-earn payroll tax records. We also benefit from the input-output tables for South Africa compiled in 2010. So how we treat the data? First, we aggregate customs transactions at firm month level, right? So we are interested in the volumes of import in totals, but also by product type, by partner country, and by sector. We merge this customs data set with corporate income tax records and payroll tax records. So, and we need the information on location of these firms and employment shares. So basically how many workers are involved in producing particular products of the meaning sector in a particular region. Yes, and we retain corporate entities only, so we are focusing on for-profit companies. And then we aggregate this information at local municipality, so basically administrative division 3, level 3, months level. And for the heterogeneity analysis, we also need this information at local municipality, months, and either sector or product type or partner country levels, right? So basically, we come up with a balanced panel of 213 local municipalities over 9 years. And because we have monthly data, right, so we basically, these 213 local municipalities are observed during 108 months from 2013 to 2021. And we focus on the total imports, but also imports disaggregated by firm sector, product complexity or product type, and partner country. Our flood measures come from the Dartmouth Flood Observatory dataset. It's a global active archive of large flood events. And during the considered period, South Africa experienced 16 floods. So we can see on the map, so these quite large polygons. So it's why we also interact them with the human settlement data. So basically we see whether any housing and economic activity is observed. So whether like roads, bridges, plants, houses. And we construct the treatment variable based on how many floods have, like, and how when floods when a particular flood happens in particular local municipality in particular months, right? And we combine both type of events, like whether it might be a large flood or very large flood. So this data basically also shows some heterogeneity in terms of losses and damage. Yeah, so we could see that floods are concentrated on the eastern part of the country. Yeah, so basically they're also concentrated in economically active eastern regions, right? So this creates an identification challenge because flood-prone areas are not random, but we know at the same time that the timing of floods are considered random, right? So this actually helps us to identify our causal relationships between floods and trade volumes. Floods, if we look at the dynamics of floods, some years are relatively calm, others have major shocks affecting large shares of firms. So here we observe share of firms affected by floods. And here as well, already the treatment assigned at local municipality level, right? So we with monthly frequency. So this was our first measure, which is like direct exposure to floods, right? And the second measure, it's indirect exposure to floods. For this, because we don't observe actual domestic supply transactions, we construct a synthetic production network, right? For each municipality, we basically link how important this particular potential supply region to our considered region. Yes, and there are two main factors of importance. First, it's geographical proximity and the production of particular product of particular sectors, let's say size of particular sectors, and this potential supply region. Yeah, so basically we construct a potential relative strength of buyer-supply relationship, and this is raw time constant weight, and it depends equally from the geographical proximity and market niche proximity between buyer and supply regions. So the idea that this lambda, it's a weighting parameter, and we assume that both geographical and market niche proximity are equally important. So lambda is equal to 0.5. And D is basically inverse bilateral distance. So this weighted measures shows that if a region is geographically further from a considered buyer region, then it's less important in the supply chain. And also here, so the second market niche proximity shows that if a supply region produces not a lot in this particular sector, then it's less important. It's less important for a considered buyer region, right? And yeah, so production in sector, we basically proxy with how many people are involved in how many people are employed basically in this sector, so that we could see basically L is the region initial sector employment, so we could see if the employment is higher, then this region potentially produces a lot in this particular sector. And then we use this time constant measure of strengths in buyer-supply relationship to measure the propagation of flood shocks in our supply chain, right? So basically we first look so we first, like in the first brackets, we aggregate the shocks along this regional linkage based on geographical proximity and market niche proximity. So if let's say if a flood happens in very further region and in the region which doesn't produce a lot in this particular sector, then basically this flood would not be taken into account, right, in the supply as a big supply chain shock. But then we aggregate basically shocks based on the input-output tables. We try to proxy how big is the relative proportion of inputs from sector K among all inputs sold to output sector, right? So basically, we could see how much considered region produces in this particular sector. So if basically he produces a lot, then the shock would be very important for this sector, right? So for this buyer region. And also we look at how much according to the input-output regions, how much this buyer sector dependent on the inputs from from the supplier regions in particular sector, right? So based on particular sector. Yeah, so this allows us to measure this indirect exposure to floods, so which basically which is important because then it shows how supply chain shocks might influence import volumes, and you can see that here that it's more spatially diffuse than direct flooding, right? So this exactly what we want. So flood shocks propagate through economic networks as well. And our estimation approach is Poisson pseudo maximum likelihood model. So we a bit divert from the simple linear model just because of many zeros. It's the first reason. Many local municipalities months cells have zeros, so basically there are no import transactions, but also at the same time there is high heterogeneity in volumes, right? So some cells, so some local municipalities import a lot in particular months and others not, and also not to use like logarithmic transformation, which is now criticized a lot. We use this model with Poisson distribution, which is by format very close to the log transformation. Yeah, so the dependent variables are total imports and imports disaggregated by firm sector, product complexity, and partner country. And treatment variables, it's own floods, local floods, and supply chain floods. Yeah, so they both represent these cumulative treatment indicators and proxy direct and indirect exposure. We also control for local municipality fixed effects and year fixed effects, right, to capture these different changes at the local municipality level and time level. So now we actually reach our first main results, and you can see like in column 1 we have seen nothing, so no significance. At the aggregate level, floods don't change total imports, and at first glance we might think floods don't matter for trade, but actually disaggregation changes the picture. If we consider intermediaries, basically trade companies, local floods reduce imports significantly, and floods in the supply chain basically increase imports, right? So it means that intermediary firms drive the adjustment in trade floors, right? And you can see that each additional local flood reduces intermediary imports by approximately 18%. So we we observe that local economic disruption constrains trading activity, but on the other hand, one standard deviation increase in in supply chain flood exposure leads to nearly 2 times higher intermediary import volumes. Sorry, I mean here supply chain, of course. Firms appear to search for alternative suppliers, and we see here the confirmation of our intuition that indeed the supply chain shocks might increase the imports. We don't see any systematic response for other firms, so primary manufacturers here, and there is nothing. And probably because it's they're a bit slower in switching and reaction, so basically there is no adjustment. We don't see this in the data. If we look at further heterogeneities, we look at the effects by complexity of products and by product group. The strongest adjustments are observed in low complexity products. Yeah, so this is high significantly changes in case of local floods and floods in the supply chain. And at the same time here we could see that the expected pattern is observed in case of final goods. So for highly complex products, adjustments is much weaker, and this also fits the idea that switching suppliers for specialized goods might be costly. What a bit strange, it's actually behavior changes in case of raw materials, but as we could see, this is primarily driven by food sectors, and probably they just also reflect the idea of higher aid in terms of in case of local floods. And on this slide, we see the impact of floods on intermediaries inputs by country, by partner country, and this is where the results becomes especially interesting, because adjustment is strongest through African partners and China. So we can see that regional trade networks matter for climate resilience, and particularly existing trade networks. And intermediaries flood-driven import changes are concentrated in trade with other African countries and China. So we could see that one local flood cuts African imports by 40% and Chinese imports by 18%, but at the same time, supply chain floods raise significantly African and Chinese imports. In case of the European Economic Union and rest of the world, local floods lead to the reduction of imports. So it's also highly expected because these two partner countries' directions of imports are very significant if you look at the shares in totals, but we don't see any substitution effects in this case, right? So basically our conclusion that proximity and existing trade ties make African partners and China the most accessible substitutes when domestic supply chains break down. Yeah. So we conducted a set of robustness checks. So we considered alternative timing windows. So when a flood is lasts for 1 month, 6 months, or 12 months, we also, I mean, not the flood itself, but basically the effect from this flood is lasting. And we also considered alternative flood measures, so no cumulative measure, or basically we accumulate not only events but months of flooding. Then we try to measure the floods through the alternative source. So we basically worked a lot with fine-grained satellite-based flood measures, but here actually a lot also of measurement errors, because the sources which are available, they are optical satellites which are not perfect for capturing floods. So here basically media-based editions are quite important. So basically the main source we are used here, it's based not only on satellite measures, but also on media coverage of these flood events. And we also tried strict regional controls, and this co-funding remains unchanged in case of all these robustness checks. So I basically want to highlight that indeed trade access might be part of climate adaptation, and here any policies which allow import flexibility helps firms to cope with disasters. Also, intermediaries matter. So resilience policy should not only focus on manufacturers, but also intermediaries might be those actors who actually demonstrate this resilience behavior. And regional trade integration is quite important for resilience, and those existing ties might improve the strategies how to buffer shocks. And also, of course, direct flood exposure still disrupts local activity, and we could see this in many cases. So infrastructure resilience remains quite essential. Of course, our analysis have some limitations, so we consider only formal firms, and our direct supply chain measures is synthetic because we don't observe direct transactions between firms. And imports don't automatically imply welfare gains. So, like for the calculation of gains, we need to do some elaborated simulation analysis. Right, and then adaptation might be, of course, uneven across firms, and this we could show with the results. The important takeaways from the analysis as well that we need really consider different, like separately, right, local exposure to floods, so direct effects, and supply chain indirect effects. And here, and we could observe that international market access is adaptive, right? So indeed, intermediary traders, they behave in the way we expected. So they imports buffer against domestic input losses caused by floods, and especially partners from Africa and China important here. Also, studies confined to manufacturing firms understate the economy's capacity to reroute supply chains, right? So basically, traded companies might be the key adaptive actors. And of course, very important to look at the heterogeneities across firm groups, across product groups, and because this resilience would depend, of course, on a firm position, production networks, and its access to the alternatives. But to sum up as well, trade can really support climate resilience, and maybe our also goal to facilitate how these international trade policies can function as a shock absorber against climate disruptions, and this adaptive capacity is concentrated among firms with existing market access, trading capabilities, right? So we should maybe invest more in encouraging supply flexibility and so on. Thank you very much for your attention. So I think I'm even a bit earlier. This is all from my side.
All right. Thank you so much for such an insightful presentation, Marina. Thank you so much. And I see you are getting hands and hearts from the floor. It is really interesting to see how firms are responding to these shocks, that they're actually using trades-off as shock absorbers in this thing. I'm going to open the floor for questions or engagements, so they can pose questions if there are any, or they can actually put them on the chats as well.
Should I probably check
I'm
the
actually
chat?
looking at the chats. I don't see anything for now. Anybody can come in and just ask questions and probe questions to Marina's presentation, if there are any.
Good afternoon, Ubuntu.
Afternoon.
It's Rachel here.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi. Just a question, reading or listening through the presentation and the impact on floods on supply, etc. My question might not be directly to Marina, but what is GTAC or the various government planning departments doing about this in terms of using this research around our flood areas with regards to logistics management or logistics planning going forward? It was a very interesting map to see, I think earlier on in the presentation, where the floods are located mainly in our main economic hubs. So yeah, that's quite concerning if we don't have a plan.
Thanks, Rachel. Hopefully there are policymakers in the room and they can actually take a jab at your question and probably provide input.
Maybe I just can add on this, because we put a lot of effort in measuring floods, and this is indeed not that easy issue, because when floods happen in Africa, it becomes very cloudy, and satellites can't recognize then flooding with enough precision because of these clouds. But recent satellite measures from 2016 make it possible, because it's basically not optical satellites but radar satellites, and we actually want to also refine our results with these better measures of floods. We could see what will be. But so far the results are already confirmed based on several measures of floods. So probably it will remain like this. Yeah.
Thanks, Marina. I see there's Elaine on with her hand up. Elaine, you can come through, please. I think you responding to Rachel's question, I mean.
Yes. So I am Elaine Fenton. I am actually from GTAC. From the Government Technical Advisor Centre, GTAC, we host these webinars exactly to bring policymakers, experts, industry leaders together to be exposed to this type of data to start off with. It is for us very important that we recognized a long time ago that very good research work gets done, but then it lands up maybe in a journal, and it doesn't necessarily translate into practical actions from government necessarily, or even industry. So this is part of our sort of contribution to expose policymakers, government, industry leaders to this type of research. But it doesn't only stop here. We would also share this with relevant stakeholders. In this case, I also saw the map was quite interesting. So we would share this with disaster management centers and other institutions that we feel would benefit from this type of information, in terms of guiding them and assisting them in how they plan for the next year, in terms of how they plan in their own strategic plans for the next 5 years, and even how they are shaping policies for the future. This is just from a GTAC angle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elaine.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Marina, there's a comment from Christopher on the chats. He's actually asking, is South Africa the only place that is affected by floods? What about other disasters like tornadoes, etc., from other parts of the world?
Yes, true. There are, of course, other disasters which happen in South Africa, but as I said, floods are most spread, and the idea is basically, though the floods are those disasters which mostly affect supply chains, and because this was one of our research questions, we concentrate our attention on floods. So, like for example, earthquakes happen, but they are like all very important for like capital disruptions, right? But they are much less often, in South Africa, and like there are no like that severe. But what we also had a look at storms. But yeah, basically tornadoes are, I see now your comment, tornadoes are basically also like this part of storms. Yeah, so we didn't see a lot of changes there.
And I see there's another comment. I don't know where you want to take that from. Akona. Akona, would you like to pose your question, come through and just pose your question, or would you like me to read it out?
Hi, Nomuntu. Akona Metaza here from TIPS. I recently did a study on forecasting effectiveness in South Africa, right? And I was using the emergency disaster database, which applies a certain criteria when it comes to the number of events that it would then record for the South African case or for all the countries that are involved in the database. So I am interested in finding out from Dr. Marina if the database from the emergency, from the DAMOS that she said she used, has the extreme events or the way the floods at local municipalities. Because if you don't have that sort of granularity, in terms of the database that you have used, then you are not going to effectively be able to inform some sort of infrastructure planning or some planning that the government needs to have where it pertains to how firms need to react to the flood events that you have spoken to. So I just want to find out what is the level of granularity. Is it spatial locality where it will start from local municipalities, then it will move to district municipalities, then it goes to national? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm fully with you. Actually, support this argument completely. So we use the Dartmouth Flood Archive database, which is global data set, right? I'm not sure when you wrote about emergency disaster database, is it something which is locally available or not? I can say about what we used, right? So this basically a global database, which is based on the one hand on satellite measures of how wet is the earth in particular pixel, right? So it's quite local, but also what they did, they basically cross-validate these satellite measures with media coverage of floods. And here, basically, this might be problematic on the one hand, but on the other hand, I see some benefits from this because, as I said, satellite measures are not perfect. So we really need to cross-validate this information with some like newspaper articles where the floods like happen in one or another area. And floods data basically represent in the end as like these polygons which might cover several local municipalities. But what we could do, we could really, like in our research, we like did some map analysis, right? So we basically assign that local municipality is affected if this polygon is intersects this flat polygon intersect this local municipality, but also there is at least some human settlement print in this particular local municipality. So basically there is houses or bridges or roads, and this is also a part of our measure. So in this case, these big large polygons which are provided by the flood data set, they also become smaller because, of course, some areas like agricultural fields, they're covered by water, but these are not something that we are interested in, right? So we're interested in where economic activity like plants and roads happen. So this creates the most harmful damage for the supply chains. Yeah, but if you know like any good measures from local providers, this would be actually quite interesting. But like if any one of you knows, I don't know, the statistics on disasters at the local level, or maybe even aid which is directed to cope with the disasters and regionally, this would be super helpful. We could include this in the analysis. Then please approach us.
Thanks, Marina. I hope, Akona, you are covered by that answer.
Yes, I am covered, and to Dr. Marina, I'll reach out to you if I see something that may be particularly useful to you, and also maybe bounce off some ideas in terms of the research that I'm doing and the research that you are doing, and how they have synergies.
Oh, sounds great.
Thanks, Akona. Are there any other comments or further questions for Dr. Marina? I don't see anything on the chats. And okay, Elvis, are you? Hi, Elvis. Do you have a question?
No, sorry.
Okay, no, I saw that you were unmuted. No problem. Okay, on the chat, I've actually uploaded a reference to the paper that Dr. Marina just presented now. It's an interesting read. It's on the UN WIDER's website. But I've just posted a link where you can actually have a further read up on that and reference to the presentation. Also, the presentation will be shared on our website and our Knowledge Hub as GTAC, and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitations. And if someone knows some more information on our research, some local expertise, we will be very glad to further comments. Yeah, just feel free to write us.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Marina, for such an insightful presentation. And I've actually put on a rating form on the list that you can actually rate the presentation, how it was organized. We'll really appreciate your inputs so that we can improve going further. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, Professor. Thanks, colleagues.
Yeah, thank you, and
Thank
have
you.
a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Doctor. Bye-bye.